Well, let's say, just for fun, that today is February 7th. And let's say that it's Super Bowl Sunday that day, because it's supposed to be. And let's say, hypothetically speaking, that we're all at a Super Bowl party and we're watching the game. And then something interesting happens. Okay, let's say that where the game starts, it's game day. It's the Broncos versus the Panthers. And then the Broncos begin taking the field. They're running out onto the field and lining up, and the crowd is cheering, rooting their favorite players and applauding and excited. Then the cameras turn to the other side and the other dugout, and guess what? No one shows. No one takes the field. No Panthers are there. And the cameras wait, and they go wide, and they go back, and they see the referees are on their microphones and on their headsets, and they're talking, but no Panthers take the field. Where are they? People start asking. Come to find out, they're home. They decided to stay home. And then they start asking why. And they find out that some of them were afraid of getting bruised, banged up, or even worse, heaven forbid, injured. Some of them were afraid of not knowing how to handle the other team's plays, not knowing how to respond, not knowing how to reply to whatever they give, and not knowing how to defend. And then some of them, they were afraid that they might look like the fool on the field, or some were afraid that they would lose and be rejected by the crowds and be rejected by the other team. And so they were absolutely afraid. What do you think would happen to those Panthers should they do something like that on Super Bowl Sunday? You're fired! All you Panthers are fired! In fact, I'm not even sure you were really a Panther to begin with. A Michigan State player, maybe, but not a Panther. Okay, just me. Okay, just me. But you guys are fired. Absolutely, unequivocally fired, because team members, they play together, they practice together, they train together, and win or lose, they fight together. Okay, that's what they do. Now, as you come in here today, if I were to start off by asking you, would you like to be on Team Jesus? Would you like to follow him and worship him and play on his team? You might be willing to say, absolutely. To which then I might reply, then you are going to be guaranteed to suffer. You are guaranteed to live a difficult, hard, brutal life that will include being made a fool on the field, that will include not knowing how to reply to the opposition, that will include not being, possibly even being banged up or, heaven forbid, injured or killed. To which then some people might go, I think I have second thoughts about joining Team Jesus, because I always thought that if you join Team Jesus, you win, and that everything would be great, and that Jesus just is that, he fills that God-shaped hole that's in all our lives, and he's supposed to bring me psychological comfort and well-being, and he's supposed to make me feel whole. And now you're telling me that it's going to always include at some point or another suffering and hardships and pain? Maybe I'm not quite so sure. I think I just changed my mind. And therein lies the rub. And therein lies very much the difficulty. Because if you're going to follow Jesus, what that means is you are following a God who suffered. Okay, and if you're going to follow a God who suffered, then if you're going to be like Jesus, you are also going to suffer. That's what's going to happen. That not every step in your walk with Christ will be skipping. That there will be times that it will be very difficult and painful. Jesus promised that. Like, for example, in John 15:20, Jesus said, if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. In Mark chapter 10, 21 verses, from verse 32 all the way to 52, Jesus goes through the guaranteeing, the promising, and God always keeps his promise. He promises in those 21 verses that there will be persecution and suffering, that the road will be difficult, and it will be painful. Okay, so he promises that. When we look at Acts chapter 14, what we're going to find is the people of God suffering. We're going to find that though they're trying to do the work of God for His honor and His glory, and they're trying to plant churches, and they're trying to spread the gospel, what we're about to see are God's people being treated brutally. What we're about to see is suffering within the church. And then the question is going to have to be, what type of players are we going to be? Those that take the field in face of all odds, or those that stay home to remain quiet and comfortable? What type of people are we going to be for the kingdom of God? So let's look at Acts chapter 14. And what we find how this all starts off, we're going to be at verse 8, and we're going to take it pretty much to toward the end of the chapter. So we're looking at starting at 8, that's where we left off last week. And Paul and company, that'd be Barnabas and a few others, are traveling along. They're getting ready to plant a bunch of churches possibly. They're spreading the gospel. They're doing what they can. And they're going to come across something interesting. So check this out, starting at verse 8, and it reads as follows. In Lystra, a man without strength in his feet, lame from birth, and who had never walked, sat and heard Paul speaking. After observing him closely and seeing that he had faith to be healed, Paul said in a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And he jumped up and started to walk around. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian language, aren't we glad it's written in English for us? Lycaonian is not something I've ever studied. Okay, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in the form of men, in the form of humans." And they started to call Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes because he was the main speaker. Then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the town, brought oxen and garlands to the gates. He, with the crowds, intended to offer sacrifice. Let's kind of pause here for a little bit. There's a lot going on. First, we got this healing, which is amazing that happened. A very rare thing within Scripture, but occasionally did take place. Now, we had covered in the past a whole lot about healing issues and does it take place today? If not, why not? If it does, why does it look different? And we covered all that in past. So if you missed that, go on to YouTube or onto our webpage, click the archive sermons, and you can watch that. No reason to spend an hour or 3, like we actually covered in total, covering those issues. So we'll just refer you to the webpage for that. What is happening is that this is Paul's first healing that he has done. Not his first miracle, but his first healing that he did. And Luke is recording this and writes this in really strong parallels to Peter's first healing, which is interesting. So when you look at Acts 14, and then if you were to go back to Acts chapter 3, you would find a lot of similarities between Paul's first healing and Peter's. In fact, it's almost like the author, Luke, is trying to intently say Paul is like Peter, which is what he's doing, trying to say Paul is like Peter. And that's because Peter, first healing, was worded in such a way to look like Jesus on a healing Jesus did. So it's kind of if Peter looked like Jesus and Paul looked like Peter, then Paul looks like Jesus. Okay, so you see what he's trying to do here. It's an A equals B, B equals C, A equals C type of thing, but not equal, but similar to. Okay, so basically Luke's recording this in such a way to be able to say Paul is an apostle like Peter. Paul is of Jesus like Peter was. Paul is doing the same ministry, same mission that Peter was, that Jesus was doing from the beginning. Okay, so that's kind of the attitude that Luke has here. In fact, let me show you this comparison here just a little bit, going from Acts 3 to Acts 14. We have that both of the guys were, this is not all of them, by the way. This actually list is a lot longer. I'm just, for time, giving you a snapshot. They were both lame from birth. Both involved gazed intently or looking upon. Both cases, the man who was disabled was able to get up and walk or leap. And then we have both had this faith connection to it, which was interesting. Several cases throughout Scripture, we have people being healed who did not have faith, and people who did have faith not being healed. But in these cases, the faith was a major attribute given to the individual. And that's in Acts 3:16 and 14:9. And in both cases, which we're about to see, the person who did the healing gets worshipped by the crowds, and they have to reject that worship. Peter had to do that in 3:12, and Paul's about to do that in just a couple verses. But you notice that the crowds were all set to give Paul and Barnabas a whole lot of sacrifices and honor and worship. Okay, so the stage is set for all of that. In fact, that's a very interesting issue, the whole thing about worship. Let's talk about that for a moment here. It's interesting that they said, wow, the gods have come down in the flesh for us, which is intriguing because some of them are going to reject Jesus, who's really God in the flesh, not a fake story. Okay, so that's ironic. They think the false gods are taking on flesh, and that's real. We're going to shed our whole lives for that. But when we hear about the real God coming into the real flesh for real, then we're not going to accept that. So that's kind of intriguing, the double standard that some of the Laconians have. And so it's really bizarre. But here's this thing. They call them Zeus and Hermes. Okay, so Barnabas gets called Zeus and Paul gets called Hermes. And this is because Hermes is one of the Greek gods. He was a god who was always talking and doing interpretations. In fact, we get the word hermeneutic from the Greek word root of Hermes. And hermeneutic means the science of knowledge or the science of interpretation, science of understanding. So the idea, they see the speaker and they go, oh, well, that must be Hermes. Well, you see, now Barnabas, he wasn't talking. Paul was doing the talking. Okay, Barnabas was not. So therefore, he must be the big god. He must be Zeus, the guy that just kind of sits in the back, all powerful and observing. So that's how they interpret this now. That's how they're doing it. They're like, okay, the guy who's silent, he's Zeus, and the guy who's talking, he's Hermes. They're in the flesh. Now, why would they think of something so bizarre as thinking that these Greek gods are now becoming in the flesh like this? Why do they think that the spiritual has suddenly made physical like that? Well, this is because during this time period, there were 3 stories that were very, very popular in the Lystra lands, in the Laconian language. These 3 stories are very fascinating stories because all 3 of them are about Zeus and Hermes taking on human flesh and walking amongst the people and the people's reaction to them. And so they know these stories really well. In fact, of these stories, here's what happens in the story. This is so much fun. Fun fact for you, trivia. You might go home and say it's a waste of my time, but you nerds won't. You'll love this. So here's what happened. So Zeus and Hermes would come onto the land, and they'd walk around. In fact, because of the Roman influence, the Romans changed the name Zeus to Jupiter. So a lot of our translations, it has Jupiter instead of Zeus, but same God, okay? So here's what's happening. So Zeus and Hermes are walking. They're in human flesh. They're in disguise. They're like Transformers, okay? And so they're in disguise, walking around, and the people see them. Now, either they respect them, show them hospitality, recognizing in them their divinity, or they don't and they reject it. Now, for those that recognizes Zeus and Hermes' divinity and treat them with hospitality and respect and offering and sacrifices and praise, they are honored and they are given lots of blessings. For those, however, that did not, they did not see Zeus and Hermes' divinity. They rejected the divinity. They did not see them as gods. They did not show them hospitality, no sacrifices, no nothing. Zeus would become offended, and he would go, "Hur, hur," and he would get mad and would turn them into wolves. Okay, so what would happen is this is how the stories go. He would turn, and this is a pun. It's actually a pun. It's a Western civilization type of pun. You know, like if you say that pun was punny. Okay, it was that type of a pun because they were Laconians turned into lichens. Lichens is a word that means wolf. Okay, so that's what happened. And lichens, by the way, is the Greek mythology for werewolves. In fact, if you watch Underworld, where werewolves versus the vampires, it is vampires versus lichens, where people turn in. That's the birth of that. So that's where the werewolf part of the story comes from. Isn't that fun? Now your Facebook questions have been answered. Werewolves with scripture, what? How? Now you understand. It's a subcontext thing. It's kind of interesting. And so now, knowing that we have some, and by the way, there's a small, just because I know there's geeks, and they're going to watch it online, and I'm going to get rashed with emails, let me just offer this. Technically, there's a subtle difference between lichens and werewolves. Lichens are Greek, werewolves are English. Werewolves turn into a wolf by the moonlight. Lichens can do it whenever they want. Werewolves, okay. Just sharing that. So here's what's happening. So now Paul and Barnabas show up, and they're like, oh, here's 2 guys. That's interesting. One's speaking, the other one's silent. It seems to fit a little bit of the Zeus Hermes thing, but they're just guys, right? then suddenly someone that has the reputation of from birth being disabled, okay, not able to walk, lame from birth, and then suddenly, by just the speaking of a word, get up. He gets up and he's well. Not only is he well, but he has the knowledge of balance already given to him. He is able to walk and not fall over. Because having strength is one thing, but if you've never walked before, how do you know your equilibrium? You should be able to get up and go and fall right back down again and have that problem over and over again until you figure out balance. This guy didn't have that problem. He got up and could walk. It was a miracle that included knowledge of understanding, and it didn't happen over time. It was immediate. It was surprising. And they went, this is not normal. And you're right. It's not normal. They must be gods. There's one speaking, one silent. They did a miracle. Quick, we don't want to be turned into wolves. Quick, we don't want to howl at the moon. We don't want to get on fours and have to raise a leg at a tree. Quick, quick, quick. We need to do something about this. Go get sacrifices. Go get something. We got to honor these guys. And so they show up to give them honoring. Because they're like, because if we turn into wolves, next thing you know, we're going to be stuck having to play basketball. And we don't want to play basketball. We'd rather do football or something else. But so we can't turn into wolves. It can't happen. Okay, we just, Michael J. Fox was a Laconian. Who knew? But anyway, so they're having to deal with this. So they try to worship Paul, and they're worshiping Barnabas. And then Paul and Barnabas are going to have a problem now, because they're going to be like, no, don't worship us. Don't worship us. We're not gods. And the people are going to be like, I understand you're not gods. Wink. I know you're not going to admit it because you want to test our endurance regarding our worship. So sure, you're not gods, whatever. But then they're going to get some visitors. Very interesting. Visitors from even up to 100 miles away. Check this out, starting at verse 14. And the apostles Barnabas and Paul tore their robes. Can you get any more clear act of grief? Saying, no, no, no. Okay, that would be like me just grabbing my shirt and just ripping it. I would do that, but I like this shirt. But they tore their robes, and when they heard this, and rushed into the crowd, and they were whispering. No, they were shouting. Okay, men, why are you doing these things? We are men also with the same nature as you, and we are proclaiming good news to you, that you should turn from these worthless things, from these false gods, to the living God, the one true God, who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and everything that is in them. In past generations, he allowed all the nations to go their own way. Which means generations and nations are kind of going to their false gods, and God is not stopping them. Okay, so now there's many religions across the world, and yes, they're all false because they have all strayed away from the one true God. That's what Paul's getting at here. Helps us answer the question of a lot of religions of today. Okay, helps us understand that here it is. This is what happened. God allowed them to stray. Okay, so they have gone their own way, although he did not leave himself without a witness. In other words, he has made his existence evident to them. How? Since he did what is good by giving you rain from heaven and fruitful seasons and satisfying your heart with food and happiness. In other words, haven't you had a good season or two? Haven't you had some good crops or two? Can't you notice that sometimes there's rain and sometimes there's reasons for celebration? That's because of God, because he has shown grace upon you. Abraham Kuyper called this common grace. It was an idea and the expression of this very thing, that God showed commonly an element of grace. It was not saving grace. It was a common grace given to everyone, that the rain falls on the good and the wicked. Okay, that is what this is talking about here. So he says God gave himself a witness because it rains, because there's food that grows, because there's crops, and because there is stuff available for you, blessings that have happened. That points to God, to the one true God. So that's what Paul's telling them. And he says that even though, so that's Paul's sermon, very different than his last sermon, no? Okay, so even though Paul and Barnabas, they said these things, they barely stopped the crowds from sacrificing to them. In other words, the crowds continued forward in their false religion. Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium. Okay, some of them traveled 20 miles, some of them traveled over 100 miles. That's persistent, by the way. Okay, so they traveled over 100 miles, some of them, and when they had won over the crowds, they stoned Paul. Okay, so these guys show up from 100 miles away, and they say, hey, these men are just men, they're not gods. And the crowd said, oh, well, let's stone them. That's hospitality for you. Okay, so they start throwing rocks at him, and they pile rocks on him, and they're stoning Paul. So they stoned Paul. Then they dragged him out of the city, thinking he was dead. Okay, so Paul completely loses consciousness, and he is just laying there, a bloody pile of heap of a person. And they grab him, and they drag him, they don't even carry, out to the edge of the city, probably where the refuge trash and bodily waste goes. Dragged him out there, out of the city, dropped his body off, and left, thinking that they had won over to kill him. This is opposition to the nth degree. Okay, because this one thing, and this is really how opposition tends to work. That there are some people that will just be like, I agree to disagree, but get out of my face, get out of my home. And then there are some that will actually track you down. That's how some opposition is. They don't find it good enough to just agree to disagree. They want to make it that either you don't believe, either you agree with them, or you have no business open your mouth. You have no business of political, social influence. You have no business in the educational system. You have no business trying to talk to other people. We need to silence you. That's why there's a difference between an atheist who does not believe in God, but if you want to believe, that's fine for you, and those who are an anti-theist, who say that they don't believe in God and you can't either. And there's very much a difference. And you'll find very quickly that when you talk to people, if the one that happens to say they're an atheist, but then they start saying, well, you're really an idiot because you believe in God. And they start really trying to shoot you down. They don't allow you to hold your belief. What you'll find is that they're not an atheist or an anti-theist. And there's a difference. And our world is filled with this. Our world is filled with people who is not just, they don't just say, well, we don't like them. They want to shut the church down. They want to take the church and Christian colleges to court. They want to try to win the political battle to try to make it that Christians and churches can't exercise their faith in any way. They say, well, you have to keep it in your homes, but don't you dare gather with other people and try to even begin to make it public, because that we will not stand for. We will take away any benefit you could have, any tax benefit, any social benefit, any rights of anything. We will try to do what we can. And then that's what's happening. If you just watch our world, people are trying. Okay, they are, some cases succeeding and some cases are not, and it's give or take, but they are trying, and that is this persecution. Okay, and that is what this looks like. And so they came to Paul, intolerant of Paul, not just intolerant, because by the way, anybody that says that you have to be pro-tolerance, if they don't let you believe your faith, they're intolerant as well. And it's amazing how many people will preach the sermon of tolerance. And the word tolerance, actually the word that means to put up with. If they agree with you, you don't have to put up with that. They agree. You have to put up with something that's in opposition to you. Then you have to tolerate its existence. So when people say, you must be tolerant, I'm like, yeah, you must be. That is a good thing. You must be able to say that, okay, if you want to disagree, that's fine. That's your prerogative. I hope you see the light someday. But then they're really intolerant of the intolerant. They're really intolerant of anyone who's different. And so therein starts lying some of the conflicts that happens within our society. And so Paul, now dragged out, left for dead. The question is going to be, what's going to happen to Paul? Is it over? Is the church's movement now receiving a very suffering, brutal blow? Or is Paul alive? And if he's alive, then what's going to happen next? How is Paul going to respond to what just took place? Let me just, spoiler alert, Paul's alive. Because, it kind of hinted at it. They thought he was dead. Not they killed him and dragged his dead body out to decay. like you would expect it to say. So they kind of already hinted that he's not dead, for those that don't know and are like, oh my gosh, what happened to Paul? Although some of you are already reading on because you're just impatient that way. Probably you guys started reading Revelation when you first got saved. I'll go to the end of the book and see how it ends. Then I'll go to the beginning and see what's going on. Spoiler people. So let's see what happens here. Starting at verse 20. After the disciples surrounded him, he got up and he went back into town. This guy has issues. I don't know if he just is one of those masochist people or what, but this is impressive. He gets up and he goes into town. The next day he left. I'm glad. I would too. But I might have left that evening. But it's likely that the next town is quite a ways away. So it goes into town and just stays at a hotel or something. You know, Holiday Inn Express had just come out with their first pillow top fluff top bed mattress. And so maybe he might have gone there and said, I need myself a soaker. I don't know. So he goes into town. When the next day he left with Barnabas for Derbe. After they had evangelized that town and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, to Iconium, and to Antioch. He didn't just go back to where the Lycaonians were. He went to where the opposition came from. That's kind of gutsy, isn't it? Yeah. So after many disciples, they returned. This is where they're sending them to. He's like, hey, guys, let's go witness to these places. Isn't that amazing to send disciples like that? Just amazing. Strengthening the disciples by encouraging them to continue in the faith and by telling them it is necessary to pass through many troubles on our way into the kingdom of God. In other words, Paul is strengthening the disciples, telling them you're going to have a hard life between now and your eschatological moment, the end times, when you die. Type of thing, okay? That's what Paul is warning them with. When they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed. Oh, by the way, it's also during this time that Paul plants the church in Galatia. This is during this time period. So Galatians comes in eventually because of this. Isn't that kind of fun? Then they passed through Pisidia and came to Pamphylia, and they spoke the message in Perga, and they went down to Italia. From there they sailed back to Antioch, where they had been entrusted to the grace of God for the work they had now completed. So now it's when, after the disciples had been sent, now Paul and Barnabas get to do their full circle. Isn't that fun? After they arrived and gathered the church together, they reported everything God had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, and they spent a considerable time with the disciples. Now, so Paul has this wonderful, amazing, painful, just a believable near-death experience. Okay, so I just want you just to get back to that moment now. How does he reply? He replies by getting up, and when does he start preaching the gospel? The very next day. The very next day. Think about that. How many of you, after an experience like that, would want a vacation? Okay, how many of you, after an experience like that, would just be like, you know what? I'm done. I'm done for a while. I think I'm taking some time off. Aruba sounds good. You know, maybe the Bahamas. I don't know. Talk about your big lizards. I'm just, whatever the case is. I think I would want a week off, a month maybe. I don't know. Okay, and that's the thing. Paul gets up and he doesn't give up. He doesn't tap out. The first response is get some rest and then get up and continue the work. Continue preaching, continue moving forward. In fact, I would imagine, here's how I imagine Paul if he were here today. Okay, if we were here in America today, I would imagine Paul, when he would be the type of guy that at some point in his life, he'd come into a church building or go into a community in a wheelchair, dragging his oxygen tank. And that you will find him dead either in a church building or out in a curb somewhere, having just preached the gospel to someone until his last breath. That's how I envision Paul. That he's that type of guy that he is not giving up regardless of anything. He is going to keep on pressing on regardless. Okay, so that seems to be Paul's thing. And let me just be honest with you. Many Christians today won't even suffer a paper cut for the kingdom. Many Christians today, once it starts getting a little bit rough, they're just sort of like, Or think of it like this. I've even had this many times here amongst other churches, and amongst talking to even other classes that I've been in, where I might offer something like, well, would you like to study Scripture? Do you want to go out and let's witness? Do you want to go into the neighborhood? And I tend to hear stuff like, nah, I'd rather... besides, it's been a long week. It's been a hard week. My feet hurt. My back's a little stiff. I've just had a lot of stuff going on. My calendar's really full. So it's just been long. Not this week, maybe another time. That's how I tend to get as responses. And then I'll hear, well, I won't be there Sunday either because I got other things that are kind of going on that are more important, because the game's going to start soon. Well, the game's not till 3 p.m. I know, but it's going to go late, and I need to be rested. So I'm going to sleep in a little bit. Got some cleaning to do because people are coming over. Well, you could clean on Saturday. Well, yeah, but Saturday there's other things going on, so I don't want to do that then. I'd rather do it Sunday morning. No need to gather for worship. After all, it's only a week, right? So you see, that's what I tend to run across. And when somebody starts getting sore and they start getting tired and they start getting exhausted, they don't say, well, we'll rest and we're going to continue tomorrow. It's maybe another time. And they just want to tap in. They just want to give up. And here's the thing, and let me just point this out, and this is really I'm going to make this as clear and concise as I possibly can. Here is the reality and the requirement to Christianity. Okay, here is the reality of Christianity and the requirement if we're going to grow as a Christian. You ready for it? I'll make this really clear and really concise. If you want to grow up, if you want to mature, and if you want to know what the reality of the Christian life is, summed up in one word: suffering. It's going to take absolutely suffering. And let me paint a picture for you. Let me take you through this step by step as to how this works. Number one, I just want to point this out. This is a great word of encouragement. You ready for this? That God, the true God, the one true God, the triune God of the Bible, okay, the God who made everything, the God who is the creator God, he is not an arsonist. He is a refiner. Both involve fire, and it's sometimes hard to tell the difference from the outside. But God is not an arsonist. He is a refiner. Okay, he's not an arsonist. He is a refiner. Check it out. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, it says this: do not be surprised when you face fiery ordeals. They are a test from God. Do not be surprised. I can't tell you how many times Christians are surprised. They go, I don't understand. Where's God? Why is he abandoned? Why am I going through this hard time? Why isn't God removing it? Why isn't God intervening? And the answer is, first off, why are you surprised? Second of all, this is a test from God. And the tests are not unusual. You are not alone. This is not uncommon. Peter is trying to say, this is the norm. You're saying your life stinks? Well, congratulations. That's the norm. That is what you should expect. God is not an arsonist. He's not setting fire to everything right now. He is a refiner. He is trying to mature you. He is trying to purify you. He is trying to help you develop the patience, the endurance, the self-control. And the only way you're getting that is through suffering. The only way you're getting that is going to be through hardships and difficulties. That's the only way. So don't be surprised when they come. And don't think that you're being picked on. In fact, the whole thing of fiery ordeal actually means, literally, the Greek roots of that is to be refined for a test. To be refined. Okay, so it's a refiner's fire. That's what that fiery ordeal is. It's a refiner's fire. So in other words, Peter is saying this: do not think that God has abandoned you because you're going through hard times. Know that that means God is very near because he's refining you. And it's interesting. We always usually want to jump to, where is God? Why is he absent from my life? Why is there all this hardship and suffering? Why is God so distant? And Peter's like, he couldn't be any closer. because you're in his oven and he's refining you. He's helping bring the purities out and get rid of the impurities. He is refining you. But many people, they hear the whole thing. Come to Jesus, he'll make everything better. Come to Jesus and you will feel whole. You will feel happy. And there'll be joy, 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 joy down in my heart. If you just come to Jesus. And here's the thing, that will one day come after you die. You might have glimpses of it throughout this life because there are ups and downs in life. There are moments where we do find great happiness, where we do find ourselves with great excitement, and we do find ourselves with wonderful moments of pleasure. We do have that. And then comes the hardships, and then comes some good times and hardships. It's like a roller coaster, isn't it? Yes. Okay, it's very much like a roller coaster. And so we have to kind of keep that in mind. But we have to realize that the real ending, the real blessings are eschatological. They come at the second coming of Christ. They come at the soonest for us at death, whichever happens first. Either we die or Jesus returns, one or the other. You know, one of my mentors used to say, here, there, or in the air is when you'll find it. Either you will die here or you'll die there or you're going to be in the air. That's when you'll find your blessings. Until then, it stinketh greatly, and nobody may abide to the order thereof. That was the Shakespearean way of doing it. Okay, and so that's the situation there. So just know, first off, God is not an arsonist, he's a refiner, and that means that when you're undergoing hardships, it is not a sign of God's absence, it's indications of his presence. Okay, and don't look at it as, why am I going through this? That's looking at it as an arsonist. Instead, say, God, may I be faithful during this time of purifying. That's looking at him as a refiner. And why is he doing this? Because of another reason. Not only is it that for 1 Peter 4:12, that this refining ordeal, it's also because it is through this that we are going to develop something called endurance. Endurance can be simply defined as being able to hold up or bear up in the time of difficulty. It's a simple, basic definition. The being able to hold up or bear up in the face of difficulty. Think of it like this. If you have a job and then you quit, you get another job, but it gets hard and your feet are sore and your back hurts, and so you quit. So then you get another job and it gets hard and then you quit. You go to school, but then you struggle with the assignment, so you drop out. And then you know what you're not doing? You're not enduring, which means you're not maturing. It means you're not maturing. And endurance is necessary for that. If you are going to mature, you cannot do it without steadfastness. You cannot do it without trying to endure. You cannot do it without holding your ground and persevering. Endurance is something that is a product of the refiner's fire and is necessary for maturing. Another way I've always liked to look at it is with an issue of like a balloon. If you have a balloon, and if you want to blow it up to its maximum potential, what do you have to do with that balloon first? You have to stretch it. You have to take it and go, and then you can blow it up. Otherwise, what tends to happen? If you blow it up quick enough without stretching it first, and you try to get to its maximum potential, it's going to pop, and it's going to bust. And so Christians tend to say, God's just doing too much. He's stretching me. I feel like I'm going to break. I've never seen a balloon break from stretching it. I know it could probably happen. Someone's going to one day prove me wrong because they're just going to be that committed to self-pain. Because that balloon's going to whip back and just give you a bruise like you don't want to know if you do manage to break it. But I've taken balloons and I've stretched them as far as I can. Of course, I don't have the, Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone pecs to be able to get it to go all the way. But you stretch and you stretch and you stretch, and then you blow and you blow and you make it go and you make it go. And all the while, you're just feeling like you're just not enough butter spread over too much bread, and you're just getting stretched and you're just pushing and you're just going and going. And God's trying to make it that you can be the biggest, best, and most amazing balloon you can be. Same thing with the rubber band. You stretch them and you stretch them before you use them so that way they can be used for more things. You want a rubber band to go around your trash can? Unless you buy a super honking rubber band, you're going to have to stretch that thing first. Because if you just put it on the trash can and pull, it's going to snap, and you're going to have pinky pain. But if you take it and you stretch it, and you stretch it, and you stretch it, and then you put it over the trash can, it'll hold, depending on the rubber band, obviously. Someone's going to come up to me with one orthodontist, little stinky, little dinky things, and be like, come on, get real here. Be serious. Okay, but this is what God's doing. He stretches and he stretches so that the more endurance we have, the more like a dump truck we become, which means more of a load we can carry, and the more useful we become without being squirrely and tipping over. That's what God's doing. He's working that up for us. And it has a third thing. Not only is he trying to refine us, not only is he trying to build up with endurance, but check this out, just another little side note here for you. How you suffer and the way you suffer and handle hardships and difficulties, that reveals whom or what you worship. This is what the refiner's fire is trying to bring to the surface. Is what type of a worshiper are you? If you respond with yelling and complaining and griping and gossiping and insulting, you worship yourself and you worship pleasure. If you respond to hardship by looking at porn or sleeping around or whatever the case is, then you end up worshiping sex or stimulation. And if you respond by going shopping, and this is how you emotionally stabilize yourself, you're just stressed and everything's stretching you too much. I need a new pair of boots so I can go through life and look for boots. And I'm going to buy those boots, and I can go shopping with these boots, and I'm going to use those boots for shopping for other boots because they're my shopping for boots. Whatever the case is, okay, then you worship status and success, or you worship things. So whenever you undergo a lot of stress, one of the questions you can ask yourself is, how do you emotionally stabilize yourself? How do you calm? How do you relax? What do you do? And that will reveal what you worship. And for most of us, it's going to be something in addition to or other than God. Because most of us will not probably go to Christ for that comfort and that emotional stabilizing. We turn to something else. And so we already can begin to realize we have a very divided, conflicted life. And God is going to continually put us through the fire over and over again to help drive some of those impurities out so that we can be the Christian we're supposed to be. And we're not going to be properly, fully purified until when? Eschatologically, when Jesus returns end times, or we die, whichever happens first. So it's going to be an ongoing struggle. Completely ongoing struggle. But here's the good news. Just when you thought that it was all going to be heavy and convicting, making that your toes are feeling a little bit squished, I have some good news for you as well. And that good news is this, that we actually have hope in our suffering. We actually have unbelievably hope in our suffering. Because check this out. When Paul was dealing with his suffering of being stoned, was God absent or was God near? Very near. How do we know this? Because Paul just healed the guy the moment before, and then Paul was alive after being stoned, and then afterwards went, and a lot of people got saved. God was very near. And so if God is near Paul during his times of suffering, where is he for us in our times of suffering? God is very near. So we have that hope in suffering. Secondly, not only is God near, but if we are suffering, especially for his sake and for his honor and glory, that means that we are near to him. That we are on the right path. And that is indication that we are doing something right. And so when we have moments of suffering, especially for the name of Jesus, what we have are first two things: God is near to us and we are near to him. And in some cases nearer than we may appreciate, because it might mean death. But it means that both of us are close together. And thirdly, we also have something else that is just absolutely amazing. It's called the theology of the empty grave. Now, I like to emphasize a lot Martin Luther's theology of the cross. The theology of the cross basically says that you sacrifice self to help others flourish. Okay, what that basically is trying to say is by sacrificing self to help others flourish, it means that you are suffering. Okay, that you are willing to go through suffering for someone else's benefit. That's the theology of the cross. Okay, that we will go through suffering for someone else to be able to benefit. So we will suffer if it means presenting them the gospel. We will have sore feet if it means they might get a glimpse of the kingdom of Christ. It means that we will go through our backaches and heartaches and whatever it means, if it means that we might be able to just possibly profess Christ to someone at some point. Okay, so that's the theology of the cross. The theology of the empty grave is that whatever you are dealing with, because Jesus is alive and that grave is empty, it means that whatever you're dealing with is temporary. That there is hope and a guarantee and a promise of one day Jesus returning, setting the record straight and bringing us a resurrection. That our graves will be empty as well. And there's great hope here. I have senior citizens sometimes that will come up to me, and I've had this in the past, and they will say, I've lived a long life, yet I'm still here. I can't do much. My eyesight is going, my ears are going, my arthritis, my body, I can't do anything. What am I supposed to do? Why is God leaving me here? Why has God left me? Has he forgotten me? Here I am on this earth with nothing I can do for the kingdom. All I can do is pray, and my mind is so confused sometimes. Even that I can't do sometimes. Why am I here? What's my purpose? And I try to tell them, think through the theology of the cross and the theology of the empty grave. That whatever you're dealing with, do it for the kingdom of God, and knowing that it will be only temporary because of the empty grave, you too will find resurrection. What that means is, senior citizen, die well. Show us what it means to be faithful to the end, because only you can teach that. People know what it's like to live well. We see examples of that. And I told one guy that was here, his name was Frank, and he was asking me a question similar to this. And I told him, I said, Frank, I love you, and you have shown us what it means to be a faithful life in Christ. Show us what it means to finish the race well. Cross that line well. Because only you can teach us that. It's the last lesson you've got to teach. And show us what it means to do it in God's timing, not your own. It's the last test of endurance, the last test of patience. It's the last test of showing us what it means to suffer until the end, to Jesus' timing, not our own. Finish well, Frank. And he did. And he finished well. See, this is what this means to suffer for Christ. It takes on many forms. Not always is it about persecution. Sometimes it's just about the endurance of life without quitting. Sometimes it's about the faithfulness without giving up. And what we have contextually here is an interesting double story. Because what happened to Paul just earlier with John Mark? He quit and he went home. What's Paul doing? Even though he got stoned pretty much to death, what is Paul doing? Continuing on. So John Mark left, said, this is too much for me, I tap out. And Paul says, well, I'm pushing forward. So here we are, people of Anchor. Who are we going to be when we leave here today? Are we going to be John Marks and quit? Or are we going to be Paul's and push on? Which are we going to be? And we have, all of us got to make that choice. And when you get to work and you get to school and you get back into your environments of unhealthy whatever and dysfunction whatever, and you get back out into the stores or whatever the case may be, you're going to be constantly given the opportunity to reveal to everyone what type of a person you are. A John Mark or a Paul. Who you worship or what you worship will be made evident to every person you run across, every person you stand behind in line, every person you drive next to on the road, and every person you sit next to in class. Who you are will be revealed. And what's the message going to be? Let's have a word of prayer.